Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And this is going to be a massive video, I'm suspecting. We have a lot to talk about. As you can tell, because you clicked on it, we are talking about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And now I know what you're thinking. Rob, you're a video game channel. You talk about video games and you talk about Nintendo. You haven't talked about Star Wars movies in like probably 2 years. And you would be correct. It's been a long time since I've made regular kind of Star Wars movie videos and conversations. Because it just kind of felt like something I didn't really need to spend too much time focusing on the channel. But this is a big deal, you guys. Star Wars Episode 9? I mean, 14 years ago, when Revenge of the Sith came out, no one thought we would ever see any more Star Wars movies, any more Star Wars episodes. And the concept of an Episode 9, of all things, we would have loved to see it, but we never thought we would actually be here. And now we're here. The Skywalker story has ended. This final movie has come out. And as you know, even though Rule of Two Review is a video game channel, my actual favorite thing in the world of fiction and pop culture and genre storytelling and all of that stuff is Star Wars. It's not really video game stuff, even though it's clearly one of my most passionate hobbies. It's Star Wars. And so with this movie out, I've now seen it twice. I made a very purposeful decision to wait before really vomiting out my opinions to at least see the movie 2 times. One time on opening night to kind of stew on it, and then I needed to also see it a second time to kind of meet it on its own terms and really understand what this movie is trying to be. And so here's the thing. Like I already said, I'm expecting this to be a pretty massive video. I'm not only planning on like reviewing and discussing Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, I'm also going to discuss the sequel trilogy as a whole, and I also want to discuss the Star Wars saga as a whole, which includes, of course, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. All 9 films. I'm not counting the spin-offs. I like them, but I don't care about them. I'm talking about the actual stuff that matters, the George Lucas Skywalker saga. So this is going to be a conversation that will go all over the place. I hope that you're ready. I hope you watch the whole thing, and so just buckle up and strap in because we are going to go ham on everything Star Wars and Skywalker saga. So, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, it just came out. I've seen it twice, like I said. How do I feel about it as a diehard Star Wars fan? It was okay at best. It's a very complicated feeling that this movie is leaving me with right now, even after 2 viewings, because, man, in most ways, I really don't like it. And that tears me apart inside, you guys. I cannot explain it. Now, I am somebody who, as a primer, just for those of you who don't already know, who adores Star Wars. I adore George Lucas. So I love his 6 films. The original trilogy obviously is amazing and perfect. The prequel trilogy, very divisive for most of the time since it came out. It's having a great resurgence right now, which I love. And I also love the prequel trilogy. All 3 films, okay? Even Phantom Menace, even Attack of the Clones, which I know are the really divisive movies there. I love them all. George Lucas makes weird movies and directs in a weird way, but he tells stories better than anyone has ever told stories on film, bar none. The end. That's just my personal opinion. So I love his movies. Episode 7 and 8, Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, have been interesting, fun, and fine movies that I've enjoyed enough. And I also know The Last Jedi, the most divisive Star Wars movie in all time. Also my least favorite coming into Episode 9, okay? I don't love The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens, but you know what? I really find way more good in both of those movies than the things that I don't like. They feel very weird and strange and disconnected, not being George Lucas movies. Like, they feel that way. They feel like Disney Star Wars movies, like a big box version of Star Wars. But I really have still enjoyed them for the most part. I was at least invested enough in this story that they're telling us are episodes 7 and 8, despite not making George Lucas's movies, which was obviously a mistake that I'll get into. And so I was like, yeah, let's just see where this is going. I mean, Luke is there, Leia's there, Han is there, so it's something. And so I was feeling enough to really be invested leading into Episode 9. And so with Episode 9, with The Rise of Skywalker leaving me feeling like I didn't really like this movie, it hurts me inside because I've been invested in following along this whole time. Even the first two sequels, I mean, I liked them enough. I was curious to see where it was going to go. But part of the complication comes from the fact that I still don't outright hate The Rise of Skywalker. It's not the worst movie ever made, and while it is like the worst Star Wars movie, it's also not like the worst Star Wars movie. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, there's a hyperbolic way to say it, and then there's a non-hyperbolic way to say it, and I just kind of think both are true, the way I look at The Rise of Skywalker. There are some things, especially with the second viewing, which did help. I recommend anyone out there who really hates Episode 9, maybe wait till you can watch it for free at home or something. I would never recommend pirating, but wait till you can watch it for free, like on Disney Plus or whatever. A second viewing might help, maybe, because it did help me. So I did get some redeeming elements out of this movie, but the overall feeling that I took away from this movie was it didn't really do what I think it was supposed to do. And The Rise of Skywalker, to me, and I mean, I don't want to go and just like rehash the plot of the movie. Really, enough people have done that, and you've already seen the movie. You know, when we just talk about what the movie is and represents and what it made me feel, I think that the movie reeks of a studio and a director and producer and everyone behind the camera having to just wrap this up, to just get it done, to just get everything Skywalker related behind us so we can just try to move forward into a different era of filmmaking for Star Wars movies. Because I think that what happened is once Disney and JJ or Kathleen Kennedy, whoever helped make all these decisions together, Bob Iger, I put most of the blame on Disney. I think that once they made the horrible decision to not work with George and work with his stories from the get-go, I think they realized really quickly that they were not prepared to make Star Wars movies without the creator. They weren't prepared to handle these characters of Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa and Han Solo and C-3PO and R2-D2 and Chewbacca and everyone else, and not to mention all of the characters that they didn't bring back or reference that they should have. They weren't prepared. They just were not ready for what it takes to make a Star Wars movie the right way and to tell a Star Wars movie the way George Lucas successfully did it 6 times before. And so I'm talking too much vague big picture stuff here. Let me try to dial it back in and again, remember to refocus specifically on The Rise of Skywalker and why this movie fills me with so much trouble. It's kind of just a big, messy story. And I think that the thing is, it fails titanically at being a conclusion to the Skywalker saga. I think that's the biggest thing that bothers me about it. On top of that, it's a movie that left me feeling nothing. And that's when I knew that there was an issue here and that it wasn't a good Star Wars movie and a good conclusion, is that I didn't have any feeling about this movie when it was done. There's so many plot threads going on. Everything people has complained about is pretty much true. It's a MacGuffin hunt, right? I mean, they're trying to get the Sith dagger, to get the little captain's medallion, to get to the guy who was taking Rey to the planet, to find Luke Skywalker, to find Lando Calrissian, to find the Death Star, to find Palpatine. And it's like, there's all these different things going on. Palpatine being brought back was just so crazy. You know, and something that I was really excited about, and I actually didn't even totally hate in this movie, but they still obviously didn't handle the whole thing very well. And the thing is, this movie, you know, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are movies that gave themselves time to breathe, and they had pacing, and they felt like they were made by two people. And I know that, you know, JJ made 7 and 9. But I think it's a different JJ that made Episode 7. And I'll say this about Rian Johnson, too. I know a lot of you guys out there hate Rian Johnson, hate The Last Jedi, and that's fine. I like Rian Johnson. I didn't love The Last Jedi, like I said, but I did like it. Anyway, the point is, I think those two guys, when they made Force Awakens and Last Jedi, I think they cared about Star Wars in a different way, right? And so by the time JJ came around to making Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, I think it was a situation of he was convinced to come back to try to course correct and fix the trilogy and to try to make it all make sense and to try to make people feel happy again and to do all that stuff. And because of that, it just didn't come together very cohesively. And the movie feels a bit sloppy as far as how the story was just kind of put together, and they had way too many plot threads. It was way too messy and confusing, and they didn't focus on, in my opinion, a lot of the right things. I was saying this about the movie leading up to the release, like, especially after the very last trailer came out for this movie, which in most senses of the word was a good trailer, but I was struggling with it as soon as we finished watching it. I was watching it with my girlfriend, and like the minute that it came on, and all I could think of was like, why are we only watching the new characters here? Like, think of what this movie was supposed to be. They were telling us that suddenly, out of nowhere, Episode 9 was the last Skywalker movie. The Rise of Skywalker was the end to the Skywalker saga. And so, to me, when I think about something that's the end of the Skywalker saga, well, I feel like that movie, if we go back 5 years, and I tell you there's going to be an Episode 9 eventually, and that movie is going to end the Skywalker saga, okay? 5 years before even The Force Awakens comes out, and I tell you that Episode 9 is going to end the Skywalker saga. What are the visions you have in your head of what that movie would look like, and I hate to say it, but what it should look like? You would think a lot of the plot threads and the characters and the emotional beats and moments from 40 years and 2 trilogies of this saga would be heavily involved. Luke, Han, Leia, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme. I mean, however you would do that, obviously most of those characters can't come back from the dead the way the Jedi characters can. Darth Vader, Palpatine, these characters. And yes, Palpatine's in the movie. But like, I felt like the trailers for the final Skywalker film should have shown us how this movie was going to just be overflowing with elements from, yes, the sequels, absolutely, of course, as episodes 7 and 8, but also episodes 1 through 6. How did we not see Luke Skywalker in any of the trailers for Episode 9? We've learned why, because he's barely a part of the movie, just like he was barely a part of this trilogy. But one would have thought that they would have made Episode 9, even with the Force Ghost Luke Skywalker coming off of the events of The Last Jedi, he would have been all over the place. I was talking to my girlfriend. I was like, why do we not see, barely any Leia? There's no Luke. There's no hints at like an Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader coming back here. We get the Palpatine lines and that's it. Why aren't these characters all over this trailer? In my opinion, Episode 9 should have been made in such a way that had so much legacy character involvement, Skywalker character involvement, Anakin and Luke specifically, that you shouldn't have been able to make a trailer without seeing Luke Skywalker, at the bare minimum without seeing Luke Skywalker. And all we were seeing was Rey, Finn, and Poe for the most part, and Kylo Ren. And I'm like, I know that these characters are the star of this trilogy, but suddenly the final movie of this trilogy is now also the final movie of the saga. And so that's why I need Luke and Leia coming out my eyeballs in this trailer and in this movie. And I definitely feel like we needed Anakin. And so what I'm trying to say is the trailers were making me nervous because we weren't seeing that stuff. And so, because they obviously didn't plan out this trilogy, another huge mistake they made, and they, I think in the 11th hour, decided to make Episode 9 the final tale of the Skywalker saga, I realized that they're trying to tell us that Rey, Finn, and Poe were worthy of carrying the end of the saga on their backs. Think about that. That's what the trailers told us, and it's, for the most part, what the movie has now told us. That the Skywalker saga, think of everything that happens in the prequel trilogy, that incredible, epic story that spans so much. And then, of course, the epic and perfect original trilogy and everything with Luke and Leia and Han and what they went through, and Darth Vader, and Anakin's whole story from Anakin to Vader back to Anakin again, and all of that stuff. And then the last movie and the story that's summing up everything that happens in the original 6 movies that were about Anakin and Luke and Leia. And Rey, Finn, and Poe were the characters that took us into that final chapter and carried the whole final chapter. Rey, Finn, and Poe, they mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. I don't hate the characters, you guys. I don't hate them. But they don't mean anything when I think of the end of the saga. When you think of these 6 movies in here, everything that George Lucas told us about the Force, about the Skywalkers, about Luke, and Yoda. I mean, they weren't there. I'll get to the voice thing at the end of Episode 9, but they weren't there. And this story was just about this girl Rey, who they decided to tell us was every Jedi, fighting with at least the grandson of Darth Vader and Anakin. Yes, at least he was there, and that was something. But I'm like, and Finn and Poe fighting with a bunch of nobodies with a bunch of big ships to fight other big ships that are also Star Destroyers. I'm like, none of this has any bearing or weight to what happens here, to me. I mean, I didn't feel this. I felt this, and I felt this, I felt Force Awakens and Last Jedi in this movie because obviously we had to. And so as a conclusion to the sequels and this trilogy, it's actually pretty fine for that. But as a conclusion to this, to 1 through 6 and Anakin and Luke and Leia, as a conclusion to this, all 8 previous movies together, it fails astronomically, apocalyptically. It fails on that level. And because they made it the final chapter in the saga, it was the number 1 job this movie had. It had this job to do. What about deliver on what this was trying to say? I mean, the hard part about all of the sequels and this whole trilogy and everything in the Disney era is that this saga, the 6th saga, George Lucas's story, really wraps itself up beautifully. Everything about these movies, it doesn't matter what order you watch them in. I don't care if you watch release order, chronological order, machete order, your mama's backwards face order. I don't care what you call it or what order you watch these movies in. They are so perfectly executed. The story, I know everyone hates sand and Jar Jar and CG, whatever. I could care less about that stuff. The story, the meat underneath the surface level of all 6 of these movies, even the prequel trilogy, is so beautifully told and wonderfully wrapped up, and they complement each other so well. Any one of those 6 movies complements the other one of the 6 perfectly. It's almost disgusting in a beautiful way how well those movies work, if you know what I'm saying. And so it's like, did we need these sequels? Like, I mean, I think we've learned that no. Watching The Rise of Skywalker, and I know this conversation is all over the place now, you guys, so forgive me. Watching The Rise of Skywalker, which I didn't outright hate. I promise you I don't outright hate it, but I don't like it. Watching that movie has told me so many things about even just the sequels and the sequel trilogy. These sequels, the way they played out, the ones that weren't George Lucas's, the ones that were Disney's random, we're afraid of the prequel trilogy and we just want to make people feel safe and comfortable. And so here are these movies. Now that it's concluded with Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, these sequels did not need to exist. They didn't add anything. And I certainly don't know what story they told. I don't think they told much of a story. I've heard a little bit of a conversation about it telling you that it doesn't matter what your lineage is, you can be whatever you want to make yourself be, with the Rey thing and the Palpatine thing at the end. And I'll admit, that's not totally crazy. I see it. It's there to a degree. It doesn't feel earned because they didn't plan these movies out. And so 7 and 8 don't fit together well, and 8 and 9 don't fit together well. And I would even argue 7 and 9 don't fit together all that well either, because there's a middle movie made by somebody else who they weren't all on the same page. They just weren't. And so, I mean, maybe that's the story of the sequels, but I don't really feel it. And even if I did feel it, I still don't think it matters, because it doesn't feel like a sincere and genuine continuation of the original 6. Whether you end the original 6 at Revenge of the Sith and then pick up at Force Awakens, or if you end the originals with Return of the Jedi and pick up at Force Awakens, again, whatever order you watch them in, this doesn't feel like a sincere and honest and carefully thought out like continuation to that story. They feel totally separate. Like the first 6 feel like cohesive, and even if you don't like the CG in the prequel trilogy, like whatever, who cares? The movies and the stories and the characters fit perfectly. This is how I feel. It's knocking crap over. They fit like this. And then you also have now these sequel movies, and it just doesn't come together. And unfortunately, Rise of Skywalker was in a position to potentially deliver on the promise of the sequels and deliver on why they've been the way they've been and what the story has been and why these characters are around and why they matter and how it all fits in with this story. But it turned out to not do that the way the Rise of Skywalker plays out. Not just because it was kind of sloppily handled and it's convoluted and it's got the MacGuffin thing, but because they didn't have a way to make these movies feel like the original 6 movies are part of the same story. I mean, Han Solo's there for one movie, so okay, I can buy that Han Solo did a thing with some people 30 years after Return of the Jedi. Luke Skywalker was in one movie, and so yeah, I can buy that Luke Skywalker met a girl who turned out to be Palpatine's granddaughter, spoiler, and was around for like a couple of days before he died. And then that was it. And so I can buy that these characters were like around experiencing events 30 years on in their lives after Return of the Jedi is over. But does that make these movies part of the Skywalker saga? No, I don't think so. I challenge you to tell me how the sequel trilogy is a part of the Skywalker saga. I don't know how. I don't know how these movies are actually a part of the Skywalker saga. Yeah, Leia, who's a Skywalker, is around, and Luke is around. Obviously, yes. And Palpatine and Han, like, just having these characters barely present, sprinkled throughout here and there, but having no real impact on the story, doesn't make it part of the Skywalker saga. You know, they had opportunities to do so. The biggest opportunity, I'll get into this here, okay? I'm going to get into this. The biggest opportunity with Rise of Skywalker that could have justified the movie itself being a conclusion to the trilogy, the movie itself being a conclusion to the whole saga, and making the sequels feel like they were part of the Skywalker saga, would have been the inclusion of Anakin Skywalker. Now, people who know me in real life and who are my personal friends and my family and my girlfriend, they know a couple of serious truths about me. One is that I worship George Lucas and how he told his Star Wars movies. 2 is that Anakin Skywalker is my favorite character. I love Hayden Christensen. We actually went to Star Wars Celebration for 2017, you know, before The Last Jedi came out, and I met Hayden Christensen, and it was my lifelong dream to be able to tell him how much I loved him, and I appreciated his portrayal as my favorite character, Anakin, and he was great. So I am an Anakin fanboy. Okay, we'll get that out of here. But that doesn't really, I think, play into why I feel Anakin needed to be in the movie, because maybe somebody would be like, oh, you're just saying that because you love Anakin and blah, blah, blah. No, the story truly demanded Anakin Skywalker to appear in this movie. Now, we all have seen the movie, I'm assuming, right? So the end of The Rise of Skywalker, Rey is being defeated by Palpatine. Palpatine is doing his thing, killing all the resistance ships or whatever. And she's laying there, and a more than halfway decent scene happens. I won't lie. I really do kind of like this moment. I think this moment needed to have a lot more to it, and what happens after this moment is very, very bad. But the moment is not bad, okay? And she's looking into the sky, and her consciousness like goes into space, and all of the Jedi start talking to her and saying, Rey, you're great, Rey. You're just the best. Rey's the best. She's never failed. She's perfect. Look at how powerful you are. Go, Rey, defeat Palpatine and be great. And, you know, even though Rey's character arc clearly just fell apart throughout this whole trilogy, unfortunately, and I wanted to believe it was going to finish properly, and it did not, unfortunately. But she does hear from all the Jedi. And as a fan of Star Wars, and especially the original 6 movies, I was elated to hear Qui-Gon Jinn and Mace Windu. And, you know, Luke and Leia are talking to her. All sorts of people. I'm like, this is great. Obi-Wan, I believe that was Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan talking to her. And yes, that made me feel great. And then, of course, the most important thing did happen, okay? Anakin talks to her a few times. And I the second time I saw the movie, which was yesterday, I waited through the credits to see the voices of the Jedi, and I wanted to see Hayden Christensen's voice up there, okay? My boy Hayden deserved something here in these movies. And he was in the credits. And so, yes, they did bring in Hayden, and I assume Samuel L. Jackson and Qui-Gon and Liam Neeson, they were in the credits. And I'm like, great, they brought these people in. They brought in Hayden, the chosen one, the prophesied one, Darth frickin' Vader. They brought him into a goddamn sound booth to record 3 lines for this movie. Thank God they at least gave us this tiny scrap of continuity to the original 6 movies and to the prequel trilogy specifically. Here you go. Thank frickin' God. And so this was nice. And he says an interesting line, okay? One of the 3 lines Anakin says to her is, bring balance the way I once did. And interesting, an interesting line, especially coming from him. I like it. I like the line because it does acknowledge, it feels so pandering. This whole movie just, I felt pandered to. And even this is pandering to me, but my Anakin and Hayden love is so strong that I will take this tiny little pandering morsel that they gave me and at least hold it close to my heart. I'm even wearing an Anakin shirt. Holy crap. I'll hold it close to my heart. And it acknowledges he was the prophesied one. He is the one who brought balance to the Force. And what I love about the original 6 movies is my headcanon tells me the prophecy could have been about Anakin or Luke. I kind of almost like the idea of Anakin having... They were wrong that it was Anakin and truly Luke was the one to bring balance. But to be fair, George Lucas himself has always maintained and doubled down that no, it really was Anakin who was the chosen one. So, okay, the creator says it's Anakin. It's Anakin. JJ, Kathleen Kennedy, Disney, Bob Iger, Rian Johnson, none of y'all motherfuckers can change that. The creator said it's Anakin. And to be fair to Rise of Skywalker, the line says, bring balance as I once did. So they do, in a very muted, quiet moment, you hear them acknowledge that Anakin was the chosen one. But then they're also saying, now it's also you, Rey. Now you're the next one. You can now also be the chosen one. You can fulfill the prophecy. You can bring balance. And okay, sure. So she's going to do that. And so that whole scene was the right idea. Okay. Then she gets up and the showdown between her and Palpatine at the end, I hated it because I don't mind the Force lightning battle, but it was so like, I am all the Sith, and he's doing that, which is a very Palpatine thing to do and a very Star Warsy thing. And then she's blocking with her one lightsaber, and then she gets the other lightsaber, and she says, I am all the Jedi, like in such a way that just didn't feel earned or interesting. It was so predictable. And then she just goes with 2 lightsabers and they just do the Dragon Ball thing, and they just push the thing back until she beats him. And it was just a very weak, not very dramatic conclusion. And both the first 2 Star Wars trilogies end so dramatically, in the best way possible. They end with so much drama and emotion. And partly because the sequels didn't give me much emotion, other than The Last Jedi did give me emotion. But Rise of Skywalker, I felt no emotion throughout this movie. And so by the time it's like, Rey is the chosen one now, and Rey is all the Jedi, I guess. And so Rey just, in the weakest way possible, Dragon Ball Z's Palpatine out of existence. It was so hollow. It was so hollow to me. Even with the great moment of all the Jedi talking to her, it felt empty to me. And so because of that, the whole movie felt empty to me. And because of that, the whole sequel trilogy feels empty to me. And so continuing the conversation here about Anakin and why he needed to be involved, it's because he is the one that the story was always supposed to be about. If you're telling us that this is these movies are part of the Skywalker saga, and this is the conclusion to the Skywalker saga, you need Anakin Skywalker, you need the man who was Darth Vader, you need the man who Episode 7 tells us was the plot thread of your trilogy. I've said this before. Kylo Ren talking to Darth Vader's burnt up mask when The Force Awakens was brand new and the only movie we had of the sequels. You got to go back a couple years to remember how it felt at that time. He's talking to Vader's mask and he says, "Show me the way, grandfather. I will finish what you started." That is the best parts of Episode 7. And to me, that was the plot thread that should have carried this whole trilogy. And it would have shown that you needed Anakin involved. And they were even going to have a Force Ghost, Hayden Christensen, Anakin Skywalker Force Ghost in Episode 7, an early concept art. It's officially released concept art. But they changed and went a different direction, and that's fine. And so how could you not have at least wrapped up this story with Anakin in this movie? How do you not do it? In fact, I'll tell you how you could do it, because there were 3 opportune moments in The Rise of Skywalker for them to have included Anakin. And to me, it's insulting that they didn't do it. One of them is the very, very end of the movie when Rey's on Tatooine and she looks over and she sees Luke and Leia there. And she's like, "My name is Rey Skywalker." Why the hell wasn't Anakin there with them? That's their father. He's their children, or they're his children. And you're trying to tell us she's now a Skywalker. She learned so much. It's the end of the Skywalker saga. Put the main Skywalker in that scene with the children. Put Anakin there. They didn't do it. The other was the Han Solo moment. And I found the Han Solo moment to be interesting because I think it was a really bad decision to do it, but I do think the scene itself was actually pretty good, and I think it worked for Kylo's character in that moment. So I'm back and forth on that. But imagine if that was Anakin he turned around and saw and had a conversation with his grandfather, which would have doubled down on what Episode 7 tried to tell us he felt anyway. Episode 8 completely threw the Darth Vader thing out the window. Darth Vader is reduced to like 2 passing lines from Snoke, and that's it. Oh, God, Snoke. I don't have time to get into all this stuff, you guys. And so that would have been a great moment for him to finally see his grandfather, Darth Vader, and learn something from him. Anakin, the good version of Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, the man he was before he was a Sith, could have really talked to Kylo Ren about who he's supposed to be and the proper ways of the Force, right? To be a Jedi, to be good. And so they didn't. They went with the Han Solo thing, which was fine. But I actually think the better moment for Anakin to have appeared in the way Rise of Skywalker played out. In the different version of Episode 9, it would have happened differently. But in the way Episode 9 actually happened, the ideal moment to me was when Rey was in there looking for the Sith Wayfinder, you know, on the Death Star. She's on the Death Star. She's on Endor. She's at the place where Darth Vader died, turned himself back into Anakin Skywalker, and said, "Let me look on you on my own eyes," to his son, Luke Skywalker. "Tell your sister you were right about me." That's where that stuff happened. And she is there. And we've just learned she's a Palpatine. She's involved in this whole Skywalker plot. This door opens to take her in to get this Sith Force-infused item. It's very dark and ominous. And then she feels something behind her. She turns around. What is this presence I feel here in this room on the wreckage of the Death Star? And it's Dark fucking Rey. It's the Dark Rey that was a nothing thing. It turned out Dark Rey meant nothing. It was a vision she saw. They hit their lightsabers 3 freaking times. She goes, boo. And then she goes, ah, and falls out of the room. And that's all it was. That's all that was. Dark Rey was the worst thing. And that moment, she should have turned around and seen Anakin Skywalker. Why was a Force ghost of Hayden Christensen not there, waiting to greet her, to talk to her, they could have had a conversation. They could have given us character moments and a character beat and growth for the characters and heart and a connection to the previous movies as well. Anakin should have been there to talk to her about the Force, to talk to her about Luke Skywalker, to talk to her about the Jedi, to talk to her about his grandson Kylo Ren, to talk to her about Palpatine, who he probably knows a thing or two about. Why was Anakin Skywalker not there to have a character Star Wars focused emotional conversation about anything to Rey? There is so much she could have gotten from talking to the man who was once Darth Vader, who was also once a good Jedi. You know, I mean, those are the moments that they could have connected the sequel trilogy as a whole to the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy and made it feel connected, created this sinew between all of the films and all 3 trilogies and made it feel just. And specifically the prequel trilogy. I mean, as a prequel trilogy fan, I know I speak for a lot of you guys out there saying you want as much prequel representation and justification and delivering upon the plot threads as possible in these movies. And they did it here and there, and I appreciate where it was there. Don't get me wrong. It's nice that it was kind of there. But it needed more to feel a part of the Skywalker saga. You needed a hell of a lot more Skywalker in these frickin' movies. And so at this point, it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about Rey. Rey, obviously the main protagonist and character that we follow throughout the sequels. You know, it's tricky with Rey because I really do truly like Rey. I was invested in her journey in the beginning in The Force Awakens. I question a lot of where her journey went in The Last Jedi, and then I obviously question a lot of how everything played out even in The Rise of Skywalker. But I still feel like there was something to her. I mean, obviously Daisy Ridley is great. You know, most of the actors in all of the movies are fine and good, and I love them in all of their roles. And that includes Daisy Ridley. And I think that the individual beats, the beat of Rey in episode 7, the beat of Rey in episode 8, and the beat of Rey in episode 9, all individually are probably fine beats. I think they're good concepts of a good character. The issue is that the other two movies within this trilogy where her story is being told don't just add up with every other beat of the trilogy. I mean, it's basically like 3 different Reys. You could argue 2 different Reys, that, you know, the Rey from JJ's 2 movie is the same, and then the one from Ryan's movie is different, and that's kind of true, but I also, kind of like I already alluded to, I also kind of still feel like Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker aren't as much the same kind of movie, even though it was obviously JJ trying to finish his own story while also still doing what Rian Johnson did with Last Jedi. And it's just, honestly, talking about it just helps you realize how much of a mess the whole thing really is, right? I mean, it's just, we just realize this thing has been so sloppily handled and so messy. And, you know, my issue with Rey is that she just, I don't want to fall into the same trap that other people complain about. She's a Mary Sue, she's overpowered, you know, it's because she's a woman, so they made her perfect, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't really feel like it's that per se. I think that really just what happened is they had a vision for what I think they wanted Rey to be when The Force Awakens was the movie. But the problem is, because they didn't plan this trilogy out, they didn't plan out the character. So where she went in 8 was totally in contrast with episode 7. And then by the time you get to episode 9, where she goes there has to be both a combination of sort of what they were doing with 7, then kind of what they were doing with 8, and then something all new introduced in 9. One of the big conversations around Rey is that a lot of people liked the idea that in The Last Jedi, she's told that she's nobody and her parents are nothing and she doesn't have a place in the story, but that the movie was trying to tell us she's special anyway. And they liked the fact that Rey doesn't have to be a Skywalker or a Kenobi or a Palpatine or a whatever, you know, a Windu. She doesn't have to be one of them to be great. She's great because she's nobody and her parents don't mean anything, and that's what she learns when she goes into the cave on Auteur and all these things, and that's what makes her better. And the reason I didn't really like the idea of that wasn't because I hate the idea of the protagonist Jedi in the sequel trilogy being somebody who's from nobody. I don't hate that idea. But what I hated was the fact that episode 7 clearly was trying to tell us, the audience, that she is special, that she is connected to somebody. I feel the original plan was to make her a Skywalker, you guys. I truly think when The Force Awakens was being written and filmed and was out in theaters, that the intent or the idea behind JJ's concept for Rey was that she was probably Luke's daughter. I mean, it seems on the nose and obvious at that time, but I think that was the plan. Watch The Force Awakens again and try to pretend you haven't seen Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. It feels like they're telling us she is special. That's why it was weird that she was so good with a lightsaber and she could use the Jedi mind trick without even knowing what the hell everything was. But it still was like, yeah, but she's obviously somebody special. She's probably like a Kenobi or a Skywalker. So let's see where she goes and let's understand why she's so powerful. Then The Last Jedi, which takes place the day after The Force Awakens, mind you, suddenly is trying to tell us. And I think sincerely in the moment, Rian Johnson was being honest when he was trying to tell us she is nobody. I think that was a real plan. I don't think he was trying to fake us. I don't think Lucasfilm was trying to fake us. I think he meant it when he said it. Suddenly they're telling us, oh, you're nobody. And so once she becomes nobody, the day after she begins her journey into the Force and into the war with the First Order, we're being told she's not special. It doesn't make any sense for her to be so good with a lightsaber and to be able to be so good with the Force and to use Jedi mind tricks and all of that stuff. It doesn't add up once you tell us she's nobody. So the sequel trilogy needed to just pick which Rey they wanted to have. That's the problem, and it's why The Last Jedi does make me mad in some places and made a lot of people really mad too, is because They were trying to pick the Rey who was special and had destiny and has like a connection to somebody important in the Skywalker saga. She had a connection to this. But then they turn around and say, nope, never mind. That's not true. And then, of course, when Rise of Skywalker comes around and they tell us she's the daughter of, or the granddaughter of Palpatine, it's like, I mean, I don't hate that idea, but the problem is it's just obvious that that wasn't the idea from the get-go. If it felt natural and it felt like the movies were always building up to this point and were always trying to tell us she's a Palpatine, that could have been fine. But we know Palpatine wasn't a plan from the get-go, so there's no way she was planned to be a Palpatine. So she should have just either been a Skywalker or a Kenobi, or she should have been nobody from the beginning. I mean, think about it. Literally, episodes 7 and 8 together is like just a really bad week. It's like on Monday, Rey is scavenging and sleeping in a downed AT-AT. On Tuesday, she's in the Falcon with Finn and Han Solo and Chewbacca and fighting Kylo Ren using Jedi mind tricks and lightsabers. That's her Monday and her Tuesday. By Wednesday, she's on Auteur training with Luke and touching Kylo Ren's hand in the middle of a little hut. What the hell? And then Thursday, she's fighting in Snoke's throne room. I mean, I'm not making this up, and I'm not being hyperbolic. If you track those movies, that's what's happening. There's way too little time between those first two movies for her to be nobody. And so that's why the reveal of the Palpatine thing is kind of the right idea, and it feels Star Wars-y to a degree. But to me, it only feels Star Wars-y because it's a Band-Aid for the fact that they didn't plan these movies out, and they just did the relay race thing where one guy made a movie, another guy made a movie, and then another guy was going to make another movie until they brought the first guy back to try to patch things up. And that's really unfortunate. It exposes, it's one of the biggest seams in the foundation, the biggest cracks in the foundation, I should say, to how this whole thing was put together and why the sequels kind of crumble and fall apart. I will say, Kylo Ren was one of the best parts, maybe even the best part of the sequel trilogy. I liked him in every single movie, even Force Awakens when people hated him. I liked him in Force Awakens, and I actually think he was really great in Rise of Skywalker. He's one of the best parts of this movie. And I'll remind you guys, for like the third time, I do promise I don't hate The Rise of Skywalker. There are things about it I like. And like I said, multiple viewings help. But whereas Rey is a terribly broken, inconsistent character in every possible way, shape, and form, Kylo Ren is kind of the opposite of that, which is really kind of ironic because even in the story, that's what they are to each other. They're like opposites that are meant to eventually come together and complement each other because they're so different and they're at odds the whole story. And that's also true, you know, just from a script writing perspective. Like, Rey falls apart, but Kylo Ren stays consistent in every way. And I loved that about Kylo Ren. And I will say, you know, another positive thing about the movie is it continues what I think was also the most positive part about The Last Jedi. And it's why I like The Last Jedi. It's that whole dynamic between Rey and Kylo Ren. It was beautifully handled in The Last Jedi. I don't care what any hater says. It was handled so well, and it's why I like that movie, despite its other major flaws. And in The Rise of Skywalker, it's the best parts of this movie. I loved the scenes when they're doing more of that Force Skype thing. But it turned into battles. Like, they fought with each other. They interacted with each other. They were affecting their environments that also were showing up in the environment of the other person. And that's how Kylo Ren saw Darth Vader's helmet and realized where she was. And I just thought that all of that stuff was really well handled. And as far as the conclusion, even though there's a lot I hated about the conclusion and the fight with Palpatine and all that, even with the Kylo Ren stuff, I hated the kiss. I hated that he died right afterwards. That was so awkward and just not great. You know, people complain about Anakin and Padme kissing in the scene in Geonosis, even though most people like that scene overall. That was nothing compared to this. This was just bad. The Finn and Rose kiss was bad, but this was way worse. And not because I hated the idea of it. It didn't track. I don't know. It just was just really weird. Anyway, even though I hated a lot of how a lot of the things played out at the end, I will say that I think the kind of bigger idea they were going for, I do like. And I totally buy where their relationship goes from beginning all the way to the end. Disregarding the kiss, I think everything about Rey and Kylo Ren through all three of these movies was really interesting, and I bought it, and it tracked, even with Rey's character being broken as far as how good she is with the Force and how powerful she is and how great she is. I still think their relationship was great. And I liked it all the way to the end, even when he died. I didn't like how he died. I didn't like that they kissed. That didn't make any sense in the moment. But like their scene when they were at the Death Star wreckage and Leia dies, I'm realizing there's so many things for me to talk about. And I'm going to have to leave a lot of stuff out here, obviously, like Snoke and Leia and Lando, all these things. But I don't know. It worked for me. And that scene where Kylo Ren, like she stabs Kylo Ren because Leia dies, and then suddenly he's Ben after that with the whole Han Solo thing. I liked that. I said this to my friends after the movie. It reminded me a little bit of Fight Club. Spoiler alert for Fight Club, but he basically is able to damage himself to kill one of the two personalities within him, and that's kind of what they did here. And I really liked that, you guys. It's one of the best parts about Rise of Skywalker. There are parts that are good. The things, if I was to kind of sum up Rise of Skywalker here near the end, the reasons that it bothers me is that it's just a mess. It's a convoluted plot. It's a movie made out of MacGuffins and conveniences. We all know about the MacGuffin chase, right? And the problem is every time they need a MacGuffin, it's like it's right off camera. It's like, oh, we really got to find this dagger. Where is it? Oh, here it is. And they reach off camera and there's the dagger. Oh man, we got to get this metal to get on this ship. Oh, she's got that. Oh, here's that. Oh, we need to find this person, man. We're never going to find this person on this planet of all these people. Oh, is that Lando? Oh, Lando's got the answer for where that ship is. Like, everything they needed 1,000 items, and every item they needed was just off screen. The whole freaking movie. That stuff drove me crazy. And I hated how the score was just these quick, up-tempo, nostalgia beats of every score we've ever heard, which is a cool idea, but in practice, when the movie moves so quickly, just felt very, very poor. I did not like that. I mean, the score, the music is amazing, but how they used it and how they sped it up and just threw it, like, it was like they dumped a pile of all the music beats into this movie and just spread them throughout the whole film. And I was like, I just don't like how they did any of that stuff. I didn't buy Rey's journey, and I mean, the lack of true legacy characters and connection to the original 6 movies, those things really, really hurt this, and it moves too fast. I really, really dislike. My least favorite part of the movie, honestly, is the opening, 20 minutes. I liked the whole Kylo Ren going to see Palpatine in the very beginning. I did like that, but after that, everything with Rey training and Leia and Poe and Finn arriving and they're talking and they're trying to get the plot going and just, it moves so quick, so dirty. It feels not good, not comfortable. And then the movie just continues to try to just beat you over the head with every single element of Star Wars. It is so on the nose, it's almost like smothering. It literally, I felt smothered with on the nose stuff. And because of that, and the lack of true Luke, Leia, and Anakin in this movie, I felt nothing. It's one of the first things I said in this very long video. The movie to me is soulless and it felt empty. And so I felt empty when it was over. And so because I was trying to let myself believe that this was the end of the Skywalker saga, to all of this, mostly focusing on the middle stuff here, I was like, I don't feel it. It failed so much. They didn't need to waste our time with the plots of Finn and Poe and the Resistance stuff. Like, honestly, I really have barely cared about that through the first 2 movies. And in this one, it's the last stuff I was interested in. I really only cared about Rey and Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker and Palpatine. Like, I was excited for Palpatine to be back. Ian McDiarmid was great in this movie. I mean, he really, truly was great in that role. Of course, it's his role. He owned it so well. But that was the stuff I wanted to see. Like, if you're wrapping up the Skywalker saga, I don't care about the fucking Resistance. Screw them. Screw Poe and Finn. I don't care about those characters. It's not that I hate them. I just don't care. By the time we get to the end of this story, the stuff about the Force, the dark side, the light side, the Skywalkers, Darth Vader, I care about that stuff. And how Rey and Kylo Ren potentially fit into that bigger picture is interesting. And a lot of these 3 movies had bits and pieces that showed how interesting that was. And that includes Rise of Skywalker. And so I just wish that they didn't waste our time with Finding a wayfinder, to find a signal, to find a dagger, to find a medallion, to find a person, to find a ship, to beat the First Order. Like, who cares about that stuff? You have Palpatine in this movie? Show me a lot of Palpatine. She's going to see Luke Skywalker Force Ghost? Show me a lot of Luke Skywalker talking to Rey, talking to Kylo Ren. Let's show the emotional beats and the emotional moments and rest in scenes of dialogue and character. And show me Anakin. Of course, show me Anakin. You got to bring Darth Vader into this. Or the man who was Darth Vader, however you want to look at it. And so not having all of that stuff, even though the movie has exciting action scenes and does some cool things that I like and the Rey and Kylo Ren stuff, it's just an empty, hollow, soulless film that is only magnified by the fact that they're trying to tell us it's the final Skywalker movie. You know, there was a time 15 years ago when this was the last shot of Star Wars. As far as we knew, this was the last thing we were ever going to see. Star Wars ends with this shot. And this shot means a lot. There is a lot of emotion that I feel, and I would bet most of you probably also feel when you look at this, because you know what this shot means, you know what it represents, you know everything that came before it, you know what built up to this scene. And I don't care if you're talking about just the prequel trilogy movies that build up to this scene and Revenge of the Sith and how it gets us here, or if you mean all of the movies in the order that they released, starting with A New Hope through episodes 5 and 6, and then going to 1, 2, and 3. When you get to this scene, there is so much here. Just stare at it for a minute and think about it. There's feeling and emotion and power here and passion. Passion from the person who created this and made all of these movies in the first place. Passion from the characters within the story. And it's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. Every aspect of this shot. Now, you could also say this might be the last shot in Star Wars, depending on if you watch the movies in chronological order. This becomes the end of your Skywalker story and your Star Wars saga. Whichever of these two versions you want to pick, it's fine. I don't really care. They both achieve the same effect. Both of these shots achieve the same effect, as well as this combined with the shot from Revenge of the Sith. There was a period where these were the endings to Star Wars the way we knew them. And it all wrapped up, and it was a beautiful story, and there was a lot of emotion, and there were characters that we cared about, and we grew up with, and we loved them, and they meant something to the universe they were in, and also to us as audiences watching them. And we believed that these characters cared about each other and shared these journeys and adventures with each other. Now, we have a Disney era without the creator involved who's made 3 new movies that they are telling us are part of this same story, part of the Skywalker saga, part of this family story, and that this is how it truly ends. It ends with this stuff, and it ends with the events of Rise of Skywalker, and it ends with Rey on Tatooine at the homestead. And I think that when I look back on the sequels as a whole, now that it's all said and done, I think that the big swings that the whole trilogy took and the big swings that the Rise of Skywalker took are all actually pretty good. I really do think that they're good. I think that they were well-intentioned, other than being a corporate machine trying to make these movies for different reasons than the creator was making them. I think that there were people who cared about Star Wars trying their hardest to make some good choices and to make some movies we would like and want to include in our Star Wars kind of lineage here. And the big picture ideas of who Rey was and where she was going, who Kylo Ren is, how the Skywalkers and Han Solo and stuff fit into this, and what happened at the end of Rise of Skywalker with Rey and Kylo Ren, and where Kylo Ren goes, and Rey becoming all of the Jedi and being able to speak to them and defeat the ultimate evil being Palpatine. It's all pretty good, you guys. I mean, on paper, I think it's the right idea. The problem is execution in a different way than people complain about, like the prequel trilogy execution. Even though I adore the prequel trilogy, I don't even think the execution was poor. But I know some people feel that way, and that's fine. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind there. But I think the problem with the sequels is just how the studio and the suits behind it handled it. Because they didn't plan it. They had the creators' involvement if they wanted it. George was on board. He gave them a story. He gave them treatments. They decided not to make them, and they decided to go retro, to make people feel safe, because they misunderstood Star Wars and they misunderstood the audience and they misunderstood the prequel trilogy. And then they were like, we don't have to plan it, just have people make up movies as they go along and it's fine, you know, it's how we do Marvel, it's how we do all these other things and it's fine. It's only, Star Wars is just movies, it's fine. And it turns out that Star Wars is special the way we've always felt Star Wars is special in our hearts. I mean, it's the reason it is what it is. And Disney, this big corporate entity, didn't really understand that. And so they went about this in a totally different way. And we've all learned the hard lesson that Star Wars without George and without the creator and without a vision of any one person just doesn't really work. There's a great interview with George Lucas that came out a couple of months before The Force Awakens came out, but it was the same year. Like, we already had the title. I think the trailers were already out at the time. A famous interview with Charlie Rose. And he said something really interesting about his plan. It was very vague at the time, before he talked about the wills and the microbiotic stuff that people want to cry about his sequels. He said something else that was really fascinating. You should watch this clip here.
They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. You know, it started here and it went there. And it's all about generations, and it's about, you know, the issues of fathers and sons and grandfathers. And it's a family soap opera. I mean, ultimately. I mean, we call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera. Yeah. And it's all about family problems and that. It's not about spaceships. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided, fine. But basically, I'm not going to try to... They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time, I said, I'm not going to... If I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do. So, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up. So I said, okay, I will go my way, and I'll let them go their way.
What I love about that, and what also makes me horrendously sad about that, is his idea of a vision. He said, I had a story that needed to go to its next natural step to get to its actual natural conclusion, the organic conclusion that was always designed within my head as the person who created all of this and created the first 6 movies. Yes, he, you know, like any creator in the creative process, some things change along the way or you add things. But when you have the big picture ideas and beats that get you from A to B to C to D to E, that's when it can all work. I don't care if you didn't plan Luke and Leia to be brother and sister, but then eventually you added it later, that's whatever. George still knew where the original trilogy story was overall going and Luke's overall arc was going to end. Same with the prequel trilogy, and he had a plan for the sequels. He didn't want to do the retro movie, as he said. Force Awakens was nothing but a retro movie, something safe, something for the fans. And the for the fans sounds good on the surface, but it also compromises the vision of Star Wars, of any story, of anything that an artist is trying to say or trying to do with their work. And he was on board. That's the thing, is it's not like they couldn't get George to help them, and so they made Force Awakens. They made Force Awakens to spite George Lucas, to spite what he wanted to do with his vision, as if it no longer mattered, because they knew some people cried about the prequel trilogy and CG and Jar Jar Binks, you know, like, boo fucking who with those complaints. Like, who cares? The story and the characters and the meat, the substance of Star Wars was there, even if you hate CG screens in the background. It's there. There's so much passion. And you can tell the person who made those movies really cared about it in a different way. There was an intimacy behind the camera that is not present in the sequels. And I think that it's important to remember, and it's why my friends have heard me say this. When I look at the George Lucas Star Wars movies, all 6 of them, and the Disney era Star Wars movies, you have the difference between Star Wars by Auteur and Star Wars by committee. The sequel trilogy is Star Wars by committee. And when George was making those movies, he was an independent filmmaker who was also a millionaire, billionaire probably, but he was still independent. And he's like, I'm going to make my movies. I've got a crazy imagination. I have ideas coming out my ears. My brain hurts with how many ideas I have and the messages I want to say and the allegories against war and politics and how I want to fit them into my space opera about a family that's dysfunctional. I've got stuff to say. And I just got to throw it on screen. You know, whether you like it or not, I don't even really care. Here's just what I have to say. And all 6 of those movies said something, and they made you feel something. You feel something when you watch those movies. Even the ones you don't like, I know you feel something underneath. And the sequel trilogy, they're 3 individual fine movies, and even pretty good. Again, Force Awakens and Last Jedi, I think, are pretty darn good. But when you look at the whole, now that Rise of Skywalker concludes it, I don't think there was much that they were saying. I don't think that there's much of a soul behind most of it. The Last Jedi does have a soul, you guys. I know you hate that movie, and that's fine. I won't change your mind on that either. But I did feel a soul and somebody who was trying to say something through his own different, weird way with The Last Jedi. To me, the biggest crime of The Last Jedi is that most of the movie's plot threads are just boring to me. It's not that they're bad. I just found the gas chase thing and the Leia stuff and the Holdo and the Canto Bight and the Star Destroyer with Finn and Poe and Rose. It was just boring to me. But the Rey and Kylo stuff worked, and the exploration of the Force and Luke Skywalker to me worked, and I felt like it had a soul. I really did feel that. But with the whole trilogy, I don't feel like it's a soul, and it doesn't, for me, it doesn't connect to the whole Skywalker saga the way I think it could have in a different timeline where the sequels were made a different way. I think it could have been something a lot more special. We have George Lucas to thank for getting Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford back on board for these movies. He gifted that to Disney when he retired and sold his company. And they really didn't do the best job with it at the end of the day, you guys. They didn't, you know. Again, the individual movies I think are fine here. I mean, I like each individual movie on its own, but as a whole, it doesn't work. And so I think if there's one thing I can say about the sequel trilogy, and I hate to say something so negative, but I think that I can't truly consider them a part of the Skywalker saga. I'm not saying they're movies that don't matter, and I'm not saying that they're events that didn't happen, okay? I am totally willing to buy that all of the events in these movies did happen and are canon, but I don't like the idea of calling them episode number 7, number 8, and number 9. I feel like they're not necessarily worthy of the Roman numeral episodic moniker, the way 1 through 6 are. You know, and again, I don't want to fully disparage them. I'm not trying to say that these events didn't happen, Han Solo didn't meet these characters and do this, Luke Skywalker didn't meet Rey on Auteur. Like I already said, I get that these events happen. I can totally buy it. Palpatine came back 30 years later for a week and was scary for a hot second before, you know, Rey took him down. I'm cool with all of that existing. It's real story in the Star Wars universe. I can buy it. And it's actually pretty good storytelling despite the jankiness of it on film. But I don't think that they're episodes 7, 8, and 9. I don't think that they're sequels to these movies. Just for me personally. They're fine movies telling stories in the Star Wars universe, but the Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga, is episodes 1 through 6, the movies that George Lucas, the creator, made. And for me personally, that's where I end it. So this is me vomiting every thought about Star Wars and the Rise of Skywalker that I possibly can in one go. I know this is going to be the longest video I've ever made. I think that's not like a podcast or a Q&A or something. I just really have a lot of passionate feelings about Star Wars, and with the Rise of Skywalker coming out, it's crazy. It's just really, we live in crazy times. I mean, it's exciting just because it's happening, but it definitely feels a little bit different than I think we all envisioned. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad about liking anything. I love the fact that a lot of people are actually out there liking the Rise of Skywalker, because I hated to see the discourse of The Last Jedi, and I really hated the prequel discourse because I love those movies. I've been defending them for 20 freaking years. They're great movies. And so I like the fact that fans, a lot of them are enjoying episode 9. Good for you, man. As somebody who defended the prequel trilogy for so long, I support your right to love The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker, because I know a lot of people hate these movies, and I complained about episode 9 a lot in this video. But you have the right to love it, man. I want everyone to just like it, because that's what Star Wars is about. So that's why I found my compromise of not considering these movies sequels or episodes, but still considering them canon and real movies that have a lot of good stuff in them. That's, I think, what for me as a Star Wars fan works the best in my brain. So that the Star Wars saga is 1 through 6, and these movies are just other stuff that happened sometime later. So I'm going to end this. There's 1,000 things I didn't touch on, but clearly this is like an hour long, and I'm sure you guys probably aren't even still watching this video. So Talk about your thoughts. What do you think about Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, the sequel trilogy, the saga as a whole? What do you think about my insane conversation and breakdown? I want to hear you guys talk about Star Wars. And with that, this has been a lot of fun. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll catch you on another video sometime in the future. Bye-bye.